video. So today I'll be reading a scary story. It's by Edgar Allan Poe and it's from a book called Tales of Mystery and Terror. This is a really old book, by the way. I got this in like a high school library back in the day. It's from 1979. I've read this story before and it's truly unsettling, so if that's not your thing, just leave this video now. And for those of you who are staying, let's get started. I will be reading the story called The Telltale Heart. Okay. Mad, that's what they call me. It's true, I'm nervous, very dreadfully nervous, but why do they say I'm mad? That fever I had last year, it just sharpened my senses, not destroyed them. Above all, my sense of hearing became the sharpest of all my senses. I heard the things in heaven and on earth. I even heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Listen, you will see how calmly I can tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how the idea first came to me, but once it entered my brain, it haunted me day and night. There was really no reason for the deed I had in mind, a murder. I loved the old man. I rented lodgings in his home. He had never wronged me. He had never insulted me. Yes, he had a cold, but I had no desire for it. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was his eye that disturbed me. You see, one of his eyes was normal, but the other resembled the eye of vulture. It was pale blue, with a film over it. Whenever this eye looked at me, it made my blood run cold. And so, very gradually, after much thought, I made up my mind. I would kill the old man, and then I would be rid of the eye forever. You do think I'm mad, but madmen are disorganized. They cannot plan anything. But you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely and carefully I plotted and planned every step. And you should have seen how cunningly I went to work. Never was I kinder to the old man. Then during the whole week before I killed him, every night about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it. Oh, so gently. And then, when it was open just wide enough for my head to fit in, I reached a dark lantern into the room. The lantern was all closed so that no light shone out. Then I thrust in my head. I moved slowly, very, very slowly, so that I would not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head far enough inside the doorway to see him as he lay upon his bed. Ha! Would a madman have been so careful? Then, when my head was well into the room, I opened the lantern cautiously. I opened it so cautiously that only a single thin ray of light fell upon the vulture eye. Just a single ray. And this I did for 7 long nights. Every night, just at midnight. But every night I found the eye closed, so it was impossible to do my work. For, you see, it was not the old man who angered me, but his evil eye. And every morning for 7 mornings, when the day broke, I went boldly into the room and spoke to him. I called him by name in a hearty voice and asked how he had spent the night. So you see, he would have been a very suspicious old man indeed, if he had imagined that every night, just at 12, I had looked in upon him while he slept. On the 8th night, I was even more cautious than usual in opening the door. The minute hand of a watch moves more quickly than my hand did. Not until that night did I feel the extent of my own power. To think that there I was, opening the door little by little, and he did scarcely contain my feeling of triumph. I laughed to myself at the idea. Perhaps he heard me, for he moved on the bed suddenly, as if something startled him. Now you may think that I drew back, but no, his room was completely black, in total darkness, for he always kept the shutters closed, out of fear of robbers. I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, so I kept pushing it slowly, steadily inward. Finally, I had my head in. I was just about to open the lantern when my thumb slipped upon the thin fastening. The old man sprang up in the bed. "Who's there?" he cried out. I kept quite still and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle. Yet in all that time I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in bed listening, just as I had been doing, night after night. Listening to the death watches in the wall, those tiny beetles who beat their heads against the woodwork and make ticking noises. These ticking noises are said to predict death. How right those predictions would be this time. Soon I heard a slight groan. I could tell it was not a groan of pain or grief. Oh no, I knew it was the groan of a mortal terror. It was the low muffled sound that comes from the very bottom of a man's soul. I knew the sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, that very same groan had come up from within my own soul, deepening the terrors that I felt. I say I knew that sound well. I knew what the old man was feeling, and I pitied him, although I laughed again to myself. I knew that he had been sitting there awake ever since the first slight noise, when he had sat up in the bed. His fears had been growing upon him ever since. He must have been trying to imagine them away, but he could not. He must have been saying to himself, "It is nothing but the wind in the chimney," or "It is only a mouse crossing the floor," or "It is merely a cricket which has made a single chirp." Yes, he was trying to reassure himself with these comforting ideas, but they were all in vain, because death, with his black shadow before him, was approaching, and it was that shadow of death that caused the old man to feel, although he neither saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within his room. I waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, so I decided to open one of the slits on the lantern just a little. You cannot imagine how silently, how steadily I opened it until a single dim ray of light came out of the opening and fell upon his eye, his vulture eye. The eye was open, wide open. I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it distinctly, all a dull blue with a hideous veil over it. It chilled the very marrow in my bones. I could see nothing else of the old man's face or body, because I had directed the lantern's ray precisely upon the vulture eye. I have said before that what people mistake for madness is really the exceptional sharpness of my senses. And now my sense of hearing was at its sharpest. There came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, a sound that might come from a watch this wrapped in cotton. I knew that sound well too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. That beating increased my fury, just as the beating of a drum increased the courage of a soldier. But still I remained motionless, scarcely breathing. I heard the lantern without moving. I tried to see how steadily I could keep the ray shining upon the vulture eye. Meanwhile, the hellish beating of the old man's heart increased. Every instant it grew quicker and quicker, louder and louder. The old man's terror must have been extreme. The beating grew louder, I say, louder at every moment. And now, at the dead hour of the night, amid the dreadful silence of that old house, this strange noise excited me to uncontrollable terror. I have said before that I am nervous, so I am. Yet for some minutes longer I stood quite still, but the beating grew louder, louder. I thought the old man's heart would surely burst, and now a new terror seized me. Would the sound grow so loud to be heard by a neighbor? Without delaying another moment, I made a decision. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open all the slits of the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once, only once. In an instant, I pulled him to the floor and dragged the heavy mattress over him. I then smiled trailessly, for the deed was done. But for many minutes, the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not bother me. I knew it would not be heard through the wall. Finally, the beating stopped. The old man was dead. I moved the mattress away and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there for many minutes. There was no beat. He was certainly stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. If you are still thinking that I'm mad, you will not think so anymore. Not when I describe the wise precautions I took to conceal the body. I brought up 3 planks from the floor of the room and placed the corpse under the boards in the space between the floor and the lower story of the house. Then I replaced the floor planks carefully, so that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. I put the mattress back on the bed and made up the bed to appear as if no one had slept in it. The night was nearly over, and I worked hastily but in silence. By the time I was done, it was 4 o'clock, but still dark as midnight. As the church bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. With a light heart, I went down to open it. For what had I now to fear? 3 men stood there. They introduced themselves with great politeness as police officers. A shriek was heard by a neighbor during the night. One of them explained. This neighbor suspected foul play and had come to the police office. We were sent to search the building. I smiled at them. For what had I to fear? Come in, come in. I welcomed the officers. The shriek. Oh dear, I'm sorry anyone was disturbed. That was myself. A dream, you know. Nightmare. All right now. Thus talking, I led my visitors through the house. The old man away, you know. Gone to the rest in the country for a few days, but come and see for yourselves. I took my visitors all over the house. I told them to search well. Finally, I led them to his room. I showed them his treasures, secure and undisturbed. Full of confidence, I brought chairs into this room and told the officers to rest here after their labor. I, myself, was feeling so bold because of my perfect triumph that I placed my own seat upon the spot, the very spot on the floor under which rested the old man's corpse. I was amazingly at ease. The officers were satisfied. My manner had so convinced them of my story that they sat and chatted of familiar things, and I answered cheerily. But after a while, I began to wish they would go. My head ached, and I thought I heard a ringing noise in my ears. Still, they sat and chatted. The ringing in my ears continued and became more distinct. To get rid of the ringing, I talked more freely, but the ringing continued and got louder and louder until at last I realized that the noise was not in my ears. What could I do? I grew very pale, but I talked even more freely and in a louder voice. Yet the sound increased. It was a low, dull, and quick sound, a sound that might come from a watch that is wrapped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet it seemed the officers heard nothing. I talked more quickly, more loudly, but the noise increased steadily. I stood up and argued about an unimportant matter, argued in a high-pitched voice and with violent gestures, but the noise steadily increased. Why wouldn't those officers leave? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, pretending to be excited to a fury by the unimportant matter we had been discussing. noise steadily increased. Oh God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore. I picked up the chair upon which I had been sitting and swung it about so that it grated upon the floorboards. But the noise of the chair grating upon the floorboards was drowned out by the other noise as it continually increased. It grew louder, louder, louder. And still the men chatted pleasantly, and still the men smiled. Was it possible they heard nothing? Almighty God! No, no. They heard, they suspected, they knew, they were making a mockery of my horror. That is what I thought at the time, and that is what I still think today. But oh, my agony! Anything would be better than this agony. Anything would be easier to bear than their mockery. I couldn't stand their mocking smiles any longer. I felt that I had to scream or die, and now the noise came again. Listen, louder, louder, louder. Villains, I shrieked at the police officers. Do not pretend to me any longer. Do not mock me any more. I admit everything. Tear up the planks. Here, here. It is the beating of his hideous heart.